The 33rd argument that is used against the existence of God on the website godisimaginary.com is entitled Contemplate the Crucifixion. This particular one, in most of these, we've now gone through 32 arguments, and most of the time I think we can take these arguments and try to treat them with a level of seriousness, understanding that often these arguments do come to people's minds, and that sincere, genuine people could in fact offer these sorts of arguments to us. And I believe that's true with many of these arguments. I don't know the spirit in which the questions are asked. I don't know the life story of the person who wrote these articles, and that's not really important to these responses. My response is based on simply taking these arguments seriously. However, in looking at this particular argument, Contemplate the Crucifixion, I do have to confess that it is offensive in many ways. It's offensive because it takes the Christian message and it caricatures it. It presents it as a silly story that the God of the universe makes human beings. He programs them to act a certain way, and then he says, I hate what they do, even though he's the one that's responsible for doing it. And so he says, what am I going to do about my creatures that I hate what they're doing? I know what I'll do. I'll send my own son and let him be killed, and that's the way that I'll solve this problem. And he talks about this in such irreverent and flippant and disrespectful tones and emphases and conclusions that are drawn from these ways of speaking. All of these, of course, are designed, I think, to be offensive, to stir up emotion, to speak about the most holy things to Christians as if they are flippant, that they are stupid, that they are meaningless, that they are silly. And so what I'd like to do in response to this is make a series of points. The first point I'd like to make is to imagine if I did what this author is doing with respect to a scientific topic. What if I took the theory of evolution, for example, that people work on and talk about and develop and come up with sophisticated ways of explaining it and describing it and so on. What if I caricatured it and said, oh, the theory of evolution, this is the idea that life just sort of pops together, and one day a monkey woke up and it was a human being, and things happen for no reason, that there's no, that life just pops into different forms constantly with nothing that explains it or nothing to account for it. If I were to present the theory of evolution that way, anyone who cared to listen to my explanation, who was informed about the theory of evolution, would laugh at me. They would say, you're irrelevant. You're not even a real conversation partner in the issue of evolution because you haven't even taken the time to understand what is being said in the theory. It's one thing to disagree with something. It's another thing to show by the way you speak about something your anger, your hate, your irreverence, your disregard for any careful presentation of that subject. I think that's exactly what's going on in this particular argument. The careful Christian presentations of these particular points are irrelevant to this author. This author, and I see this so frequently nowadays, that's why I wanted to highlight these points about it. There are atheists so frequently who are talking about Christian theology in ways that are so disrespectful, they are so belittling, they are so distorted, they're such caricatures that to even talk about them or to address them in detail or to even read them is for most Christians just deeply offensive. Because it strikes at things that we find most meaningful and most profound. To give you one example, this author says, the Bible teaches, Jesus says in John's Gospel, he who has seen me has seen the Father. Meaning by that, if you look at Jesus, you're really looking at God. And then he goes to the scene of Jesus on the cross where he cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And he says here, what are we to understand this to be? Myself, why have you forsaken me? And so he draws this sort of silly conclusion based on these two verses of Scripture that are haphazardly thrown together. By this argument, or by this observation, as well as by the other sort of arguments that are made by this particular author, it is clear to see that the author has no real appreciation of many theological concepts that are vital to Christian theology. I counted just a few of them. I could enumerate many of them based upon this presentation alone. But it's clear that this author does not understand anything about the Christian theology of the Trinity. It's clear that this author has no understanding of the Christian doctrine of the incarnation, the two natures of Christ, the one person of Christ. It's clear that this author has no understanding or appreciation of the Christian understanding of the death of Jesus, the atoning death of Jesus, its meaning, its significance. It's clear that this author has no understanding of the omnipotence of God or the omniscience of God and what those things mean, the way he caricatures them here. It's clear that he has no real appreciation or understanding of the Christian approach to human freedom and morality and what these things mean. All of this is just wrapped up in this one short article that this author offers, in which he misrepresents or caricatures or misunderstands all of these major areas of Christian theology. So what would a evolutionary biologist do, just to use that one as my example, because presumably most atheists who would take the time to look at this would understand the significance of that particular teaching for them, and that's why I choose that particular idea. What would a evolutionary biologist say in response to a person who so horribly misrepresented evolutionary biology, who showed no basic grasp of any of the arguments, observations, scientific data, or whatever that are used in support of the theory of evolution? What would they think of someone who so fundamentally misunderstood everything? How would they respond to them? My guess is that most of them would grow incredibly impatient, and they would say, you need to go back to school and take Biology 101, and then you come back and talk, because it's obvious you don't have a clue what you're talking about. And that's almost like the response I get when I read this particular article. It's that it is based primarily on anger and hatred of Christianity, but an anger and hatred toward Christianity that is fundamentally uninformed, that is fundamentally without a foundation to allow for any kind of meaningful exchange of insights or observations. I don't know how many times in my life I've been asked by students questions about, well, if Jesus is the incarnate God, then why does he pray? And then we can have a meaningful conversation about that. And I don't remember at the end of those conversations, sometimes which might last days of classes, because we then discuss much more biblical data than a single isolated text, and then we draw together many different things, and we see an answer that emerges from those observations. But in all of those conversations, I don't remember anyone getting to the end of that conversation and saying, oh, well, that's just completely stupid. That makes no sense at all. What I find is that people who have an openness to conversation about it and thinking about these kinds of topics say, now I see, now I understand. Thanks for explaining that. That's the typical response that I recall getting on these kinds of questions from students. In this particular case, we have what is obviously designed to be an inflammatory making jabs sort of in a polemical context, in a debate context, just to score some points by trivializing and expressing in a silly way the Christian message. But this is not fair, and this is not respectful, and this isn't a meaningful way to carry on a conversation. And I would also suggest that this is not a way to get people interested in atheism who have a Christian background. This is a way of turning people off because of the level of misrepresentation and distortion of Christian theology that goes on in it. Now, I would just conclude by saying that as a Christian, not only is this offensive, but also it causes me to return to the essence of my faith, of my Christian faith, and see once again why it is that we believe so deeply in what we believe. That unlike what is caricatured here, as a Christian we believe that not only does God exist and that there are fantastic reasons to believe in the existence of God, but that the story of Jesus and the incarnation and the love of God shown toward human beings in the Christ who shares with us in our sufferings, ultimately giving himself in sacrifice for the sins of the world, that message, although not understood by this atheist in any meaningful way, that message is the most wonderful message that we've ever heard, and it gives to us a deep sense of love and gratitude toward the God who would show that kind of love for each of us. So rather than accomplishing its purpose, I think this charge to contemplate the crucifixion should lead us to a greater commitment and greater love of the Christian faith.